Hi. Oh, wait. I'm talking because we all know each other already. So I guess for anybody who sees this, I'm Pamela LiVecchi. I'm one of the lecturers in the psychology department. I'm here with Dr. Karla Batres and Dr. Emese Ilyes. They're also lecturers in the psychology department, and we are talking today about how to engage in critical thinking beyond the typical intellectualization of critical analysis. So there are other ways of engaging in critical analysis that we think can include self-reflection, which requires some self-awareness and some vulnerability. And so we're going to talk today about one way of an option of going about that. So welcome, everybody. And so we all kind of know each other. So, I mean, I don't think we could do introductions. We could ask some other things. What do you guys think?
I mean, we could definitely talk about, I think, in terms of the education that we got about teaching, right? So I'm Dr. Karla Batres for the recording. I know that the people that are here know me. And we really wanted to get a sense of like your teaching journey in a little bit, not, So for example, when I was in grad school, right, we know that in a lot of PhD programs, the training on teaching is very minimal, if existent at all. And so, for example, I only had one class on teaching. And the entire purpose of the class was to teach us how to teach in the least strenuous way possible. So time saving seemed to be the focus of the class, like how not to focus on teaching so you could go and do your research, right? And that was the extent of teaching that I got. So when I went into teaching, I taught in the same ways that I had been taught for a really long time, perpetuating a lot of the same harms that I experienced as an undergraduate student, feeling like I didn't belong as a first generation student, someone that didn't really have anybody to walk me through academia, not really understanding. And I taught in exactly the same ways. And it's not until I realized that I wasn't really bringing my like true authentic self and reflecting in that way, that I was able to really change the way that I approach teaching, and finding that when I made myself more authentic, that the reaction from the students was a lot better. So I don't know if Pam and Emese, you want to talk about how you brought the teaching, and then we'll have our audience to it.
Yeah, I mean, so in my program, I actually had no education on teaching whatsoever. I went to a program that was a PsyD program, and it was integrative in terms of their theoretical orientation, and it also had a forensic focus. And I don't know that there was even a mention of teaching. And so when I first began teaching, I was really just modeling after what had been shown to me, which was a mix of, just to put it simply, I think some good, some bad. I also went to a Catholic high school, and truly, when I first started teaching, I could see some remnants of how I was behaving, because of what was bothering me and what I was looking for was truly, actually, I think even from high school, because these things were a bit deeply ingrained. And so no education on teaching outside of workshops I started doing after I started teaching. So it was a bit of a backward process.
Yes, I always love hearing the paths we took, the roots and routes that we took to where we are today. For me, I always struggle with where I need to begin that story. Um, I grew up with I grew up in Transylvania, which is a part of Romania. I'm Hungarian, and I grew up in this isolated community in the mountains during an authoritarian regime that specifically made life hard for my ethnic community. And my mom was a teacher. And I saw the way that the classroom was a space of resistance. You know, she taught in a language that was not legal. She took her students to underground plays that were not allowed by the government. So I saw the way that the classroom and teaching was an act of resistance. And I was just informed by that. Then when we came to the US, we experienced a lot of economic precarity, lost homes, just had very little. And And I was very fortunate because I ended up going to a small liberal arts college. So I worked hard in high school. That was an important touchstone for me. And then when I went to that tiny little liberal arts school, I was like, oh, whoa, some people's educational experiences, it was so different. I thought everyone had the same education in the US, and my mind was blown. You know, we were in these like small little rooms talking to each other. It was a very like co-constructing the learning experience. But then I got to see all of these things like, oh, that wasn't available to people who were poor, you know, that I grew up with in the Midwest. I felt like I snuck into this whole other way of understanding teaching yet again. And so in grad school, you know, I ended up in a program that I will forever be grateful for. I can't imagine being able to think as critically as I was able to think anywhere else in the world than at the GC here at CUNY. And so they are very much, you know, education was thought of as this like transgressive act. And we were very much protected. You know, we were allowed to teach with this kind of care, and we would constantly, a lot of us in the program would be questioned for it, but we were protected. So even though I never received like deliberate education on how to teach, it's more like the ethic that was there from the very start, but also seeing all the inequities that are sort of embedded in that experience. So that is a long and short of how I came to know how to teach, but I'm still feel like I'm learning all of it, which is why it's so great to be able to be in a space with all of you to get to learn together, to like keep this active part going. So, you know, I would love to. I'm looking at you, Marissa. I've been making eye contact with you this whole time. So I'd love to invite you to share next, and then feel free to call on whoever after.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Tramontano. I'm a lecturer in the sociology department, but I adjuncted at John Jay for about a decade. I use she, her pronouns. In terms of, I guess, the educational journey, despite my identity and appearance, my mother was a Black Panther in Boston in the 60s. I don't know how much they liked her, but she followed them around and she listened. And so the Black Panther approach to education was something that she supplemented my public school education at home with always. And I don't know that I let it in at first. My experience was very similar to Karla, where even though I was at the GC, and even though we were given opportunities to teach from our third semester, it was all how to make it less, right? Use a textbook that has test banks and PowerPoints and things like that. And, you know, I had imposter syndrome. So, you know, I came in and followed all of that advice, just like Karla. And then slowly over time, I realized A, that it wasn't me. B, that even when I was using the content provided, I was teaching it differently and I was talking about it in a way that was actually diminished by using the canonical order of a sociology textbook and things like that. And the other thing that was really important to my journey is someone wise said, nobody learns when they feel shame. And I feel like this is kind of a revolution among millennial parents and things like this as well, that shame was a very convenient form of social control. And our John Jay students struggle with shame so much because of their experiences in school before they arrived here, because of the approach of some colleagues who are still using the practices that Karla, I, and others were taught. And so my classrooms are all about uplifting. Like, I'm very flexible, I'm very accommodating, I'm very informal, I'm very approachable. My goal for my teaching is to strike the kind of balance that I've actually heard Jill talk about at the teaching symposium that was for all the people that have ever won or been nominated for the Distinguished Teaching Prize, of like having that sophisticated pitch for the level of the course, while then using all of the pedagogy around the sophisticated content to make it accessible. And now that I'm mostly teaching first year students, I realize the incredible privilege that we have in socializing these first year students to the college experience. And so a lot of it for me has been trial and error. My big pivot this semester, Karla, is a very colorful syllabus with lots of graphics and things like that. So on the first day of class, I can really teach them what a syllabus even is in a way that doesn't look like 8 single-spaced pages of Times New Roman, you know? It's literally hot pink. So that's what I would share. Jill, I can't wait to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really fun to hear everybody's journeys. I agree with you all that teaching is a journey, and my journey is really long. I did my PhD in the UK at a time where maybe about 3 to 5% of the population went to undergraduate, right? So we didn't even have any teaching classes. The undergraduate degree that I did was very hands-on. So it was optometry. So I had a lot of practical, clinical experiences, and that maybe has shaped a little bit of how I think about teaching and thinking about how to make it accessible. Because what I do is very much activity-based. I think when I came to the United States, after doing my PhD, it was a real wake-up call to me because of the diversity of learners that I came across. And I realized that my students were not like me in the way that they learned. And so I had to think about other ways of coming to solutions. And I think a really big influence for me was my kids going to a very progressive school. And yeah, so, you know, K through 8, pre-K through 8, they went to an amazing school that really valued diversity and really valued student-centered teaching. And I think through that really began to shape the way that I changed the way that I taught. So I'm always evolving, I think, as a teacher. And I think it's always funny because I always think that the preparation for a course is really lengthy, and people are like, oh yeah, but you've taught that before. And I'm like, yes, but so much to incorporate from having taught it before, right? So I think it's just a continual journey. And I like that. I think that's what keeps it exciting too. So I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. Athava? Am I saying that right? Athava? Athava?
Hey, hi. Yes.
He's helping facilitate the Zoom. Sorry.
Oh, I see. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. I didn't realize.
No, I wanted to make
Allison.
I was waiting to make
Allison.
sure, but yes, that's
How about Allison then?
Oh, wait, no, I'm an observer.
I
Well,
was
okay,
really
then I think we're
hoping you
done.
would tell us.
Yeah, and I apologize for coming in late. You are all familiar with John Jay Tech, right? My computer decided that the 20 minutes it was going to break down was the ones, you know, from 8:50 to 9:10. So I missed the prompt, but it sounded like a journey. And you don't need to hear my journey unless you really want to. But I'm going to say, first of all, I love this group. I'm like, I just want to listen to you all. I am so proud of everything you've done. I can't even believe it. You guys are just the bomb. But Karla, I came in and you were talking about bringing your authentic self to your teaching and not sort of playing the role of professor. I guess you didn't say that, but I'm hearing it. And I'm just going to say on my own journey as an administrator, I'm feeling the same thing, right? That it's only as I get more comfortable and I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to be Allison instead of my idea of a provost or whatever it is. And it's better. And people connect with me better.
right? Because I am being authentic. And so it makes sense in terms of the classroom. Yeah, but I'm really here just to listen and learn from you all because you're really doing amazing work and more than I know.
I just want to say, Provost Piece,
Yes.
that we all really appreciate you as a teacher and an educator, in addition to the administrative role you've been in so long. I was recently in a meeting with Karla Barrett where she told me about one time you were coming to teach at the prison with her. And at the last minute, everything fell apart, and you were able to teach these guys how to write sonnets with almost nothing. And I imagine, based on my experience with you, that the reason they responded so well is that authenticity. You know, so many people come in there and fake and whatever, and you're just you all the time.
What I finally learned is I can't fake not being me. Yeah, thank you, Marissa. That's really, really kind. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for sharing. It seems like, and what I love about all this is that we have a lot of common ground in terms of how we understand an approach to teaching, which I love, but it also means we're kind of like preaching to the choir a little bit over here, right? But I still think there's a productive conversation to be had, because one of the things I've learned in trying to be my authentic self, right, is that that requires a great deal of vulnerability, right? And that's something that we're going to get into. But we thought that before we launched into that, that it would be helpful to have a common understanding of what we mean by critical thinking, right? Because there's the, the critical thinking on an intellectual level, but what do you mean when you say critical thinking? So I think Emese is going to put the Padlet into the chat, or I can do it if.
Okay, and I will also share the screen. So if you've been to sessions with us, you've noticed that we have grown quite accustomed and fond of this particular tool. But if this is new to you, we will show you how it works. So if you click on it, you'll see a little green plus button on the bottom, and you can just add your thoughts there. And we just love to see, so I'm sharing my screen so we can see our responses. And we'd love to see what comes up for you when you hear critical thinking, how you define it in your words. And you can write long, short. Okay, so
Okay, so let's take a look together. What do we see here? Engaging with material on a deeper level. I like that, relevance and truth. I think it is questioning the given or stated and bringing alternative context to bear that in questioning. Interrogating, taking for granted assumptions. I like that. Define, apply, contrast, and critique.
I can explain that more if that's helpful too.
Examining systems and looking deeply into what's presented to us, allowing an analysis based on what we know, our experiences, who we are. This includes how we think and how we feel. What do we see here in terms of commonality?
Question. Like as a commonality, question.
I see a lot of thinking.
Not taking anything at face value.
I agree. I agree. I'm curious, even from what we were just saying, are there ways in which critical thinking or critical analysis, was this taught to us explicitly, or was it something that we gathered? Less on emotion. I noticed that too.
No, I don't think I've ever been anywhere where it was defined.
Yeah.
The offer to explain my define, apply, contrast, critique might offer a good contrast to that, because that's how I teach sociological theory, like critical thinking, and not just learning theory you have to regurgitate, like your writing assignment, you guys, for the Gen Ed project, right? Like making it your own, is that you have to be able to define things in their original context, right? Be able to just observe what that thinker was saying, but then be able to apply that to a contemporary or relevant context, be able to contrast it with other theories, and to be able to see its strengths and weaknesses. And I find that that 4-step process that was taught to me as how to develop critical thinking has really worked in my classrooms here.
Yeah, so I think that that's a kind of a common thing, is that there's almost like steps to critically analyzing. And the thing we were thinking of here that we can maybe offer a space for discussion that could be interesting is that it is typically, like Jill said, focused on this intellectual engagement with information. And there's a piece of it that's left out that we think is actually necessary, which is the more human reaction to it that can include emotional reactions, which we think require some vulnerability. So it's cool that we're on the same page, though, and I appreciate that we were able to define critical thinking together.
So what we were thinking now is to share one particular way of peeling back critical thinking so that we can sort of touch on emotions, on what's happening in our bodies, and ways that that can look in a classroom. Because when we think about critical thinking, and as you said, Allison, we've been in so many spaces, but we've never really defined it. So there are ways that it's being enacted. And one of the things that we think about is that it's often sort of limited to the mind. You know, it's limited to how we think. And so for us as educators, we care deeply about vulnerability and how that might affect learning and how that affects the classroom environment. So we're going to share just a few minutes of content here with you. So this is something that the three of us are constantly in conversation about. We're always reflecting on the way that learning requires vulnerability. But this isn't just something that is relevant to our students. You know, our students have to be vulnerable in order to be transformed by the learning experience. That takes vulnerability. But it also requires us as educators to show up vulnerably. And that is all an aspect of teaching as well as learning. And that's both because, as we were saying, as we were introducing ourselves, you know, teaching is this process. We're always learning how to become better teachers. But that is also something that really sets the tone for the entire classroom community. We're modeling what is possible in terms of learning. And so we're building on the lineage of some brilliant thinkers. Some of these names you might already know. but bell hooks. Are you all familiar with bell hooks? And yes, of course, yeah, we're surrounded by bell hooks quotes. Also, there's no reason why you should know this, but bell hooks and I share a birthday.
Yeah.
All right, that was important for me to mention because
You are destined for greatness, Emese.
um, we love bell hooks and we love Bettina Love. Catherine Denial just came out with a great book called Pedagogy of Kindness that I highly recommend. Beautiful read and very validating. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz talks about the archaeology of the self in the classroom. And today we're going to be sharing about the work of Bianca Williams specifically. Are you all familiar with Bianca Williams?
I am not.
Yay, okay. So yeah, and I was so fortunate because it was part of the grad center experience where one of my fellow colleagues there, who was actually in the cohort behind me, who introduced me to her work, and specifically her writing about radical honesty in the classroom. So radical honesty, according to Bianca Williams, sort of rests on these three core concepts. One of them is truth telling, being able to just openly and through our own lived experience examine assumptions by sharing personal truths and emotions. The next sort of core foundation in radical honesty is valuing narrative, using personal experiences to connect individual stories to broader structural issues. And we know this, we know this on so many different levels, just how much stories matter, like stories move us. And that's also an avenue toward understanding these big structural experiences. And I'm thinking so much about what we're about to enter the next few months collectively in yes. Yeah. I was teaching in the 2016 election cycle, and boy, was it ever palpable, the ways that our bodies are connected to structures and systems. And it's always the case, whether or not it's as palpable as it is during certain times. So being able to acknowledge that and move towards that rather than deny that. And then what Karla was talking about really emphasizing critical analysis and authenticity to inform practices and to generate social change. And this is inspired by Black feminist scholars. So that's sort of really enacting the values, not only talking about them. It's important to talk about them, but what does it look like to embody it? So that's what this sort of radical honesty in the classroom kind of invites us to do, that level of like embodied critical reflection, modeling how these stories and how these emotions show up in learning. So specifically, what we wanted to do is to show you Bianca Williams's script. And let me go over here. So it's actually two different slides. But Bianca Williams has a beautiful article about this. Happy to share the link and the PDF with you if you're interested, where she talks about this and publishes her script. But Bianca Williams, at the start of every class, offers this beginning demonstration of radical honesty. And it's not, limited to the first class. It is woven throughout the whole classroom experience. But what we would love to do is to first have you read this. And I'll give us a minute or two for this slide, and then I'll go to the second slide. Are we okay to go to the second slide?
Yeah.
So I'll stop sharing there. And what we were hoping we could do was to have us work on some version of a similar practice. Pam, do you want to chat a little bit about that?
So we were thinking, so this is something super interesting to us. There's one way where we could model and somehow do a version of what Bianca just did. It could include things about our social identities and our history and things that we like. I think it can also include what our experience has been being us within our field. And as a psychologist, we also think about self-disclosure in a variety of ways. There's self-disclosure, like I'm going to explicitly share information. And then there's another version of self-disclosure that we call like the in the moment self-disclosure. And so in this moment, we're thinking about putting together a script, but self-disclosure can happen as we're going through slides or doing an activity, reflecting on how we're feeling about it, calling attention to how students seem that they're feeling about it as they're having nonverbal reactions and kind of drawing attention to them or inviting them in. But to do that, we have to be doing that ourselves first in front of the room. It's the only way to kind of invite that in as being safe. So I think it's something we could be thinking about if we try right now ourselves to put together like a brief way of representing who we are. It could look just like this script, or there's can be another way that you do it your way, where you show up with the intention of inviting students in to also be themselves. How could we kind of talk about ourselves?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So we started by talking about authenticity, and then you've introduced this idea of in the moment self-disclosure. I fake that sometimes, right? Like I've been teaching intro to sociology. I'm starting my 11th year here. And I pretend that I just realized this, or I pretend that I'm going to share something that I haven't shared with other students. And so I'm kind of wondering before we start, if you can speak a little bit to that pedagogical device, because I share with them in a way that like makes fun of myself, to make them comfortable, in a way to incentivize participation by being like, if you just listen to me, you're going to have all 40-year-old white lady examples. Like, let's hear from you. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that in conjunction with authenticity before I think about how I would do this differently based on your content.
Does it feel authentic to you when you do that?
It feels like a stand-up comedian who does the same joke on the whole tour.
But does that feel, because I use humor a lot in my courses too. Like but it's authentic to me because that's just who I am. Pam and Emese will tell you that one of the ways I deal with the world is by laughing, right? Like I would rather laugh than cry. So I laugh. I bring in humor, and that's just something that I authentically bring with me into my classroom, whether that's poking fun of myself, the world. So I would say you have to decide, because we can't tell you,
Right.
whether doing that feels authentic to you. That would be my instinct, but maybe Pam and Emese have a different view of this?
No, I'll say too, I have an uncle who's also an educator in Italy, and he said sometimes he feels like he's going in and he's like doing a dance, trying to get people interested. And I said, I felt that too. For me, though, and this isn't anything to do with you, for me, I find in those moments where I feel like I'm doing that thing, it's because I'm feeling a little bit anxious and I'm feeling this need for the students to be enjoying what's going on. And if I kind of relax a little bit, and take it down a notch and be myself, I get what I'm looking for anyway, which is students to be kind of comfortable and involved. Even minimal amounts of storytelling about yourself, like this is how I felt when I first saw this, resonates. I mean, if I think about professors now, I went to Temple University, which culturally is very similar to John Jay. If I think about any memories I have from that, it is moments when teachers were talking about themselves in an authentic kind of way. Like, let me tell you about what it was like when I went to school, or when I learned this, what excited me. Those are the only snapshots I have left. Not any of the amazing things that they taught me or showed. It's all about these like snippets of them with a story. It's like very powerful.
So and one of the reasons why we, wanted to create a space for this, to like engage with the script is for us to have the opportunity to pay attention to what that feels like for us. So what we would love for you to do is, and it's 9:40 right now, we have such brief time. So can you do you think 3 minutes is a good start? I can put my timer on and work on what that script modeled by Bianca Williams would look like. So that way it'll give us a chance afterwards to be able to see how that felt, see what came up for you, see what questions, how you're already thinking about it in class. So we really wanted to make sure we had time for that sort of collective processing. Does that seem like a good time, 3 minutes?
Sure.
Perfect. I'll start a timer and maybe I'll play music. And, and I know these scripts probably take more time, and hopefully this began a process and even gave you a little bit of an insight about how this felt, you know, what sort of hesitations came up as you were moving through this, and what sort of possibilities, what is exciting about engaging with a script like this in the context of the classroom, you know, with our learning community. So we wanted to now just create space for this to just hold what has come up for you, to invite you to share what is exciting about this potentially, or what hesitations you might have. What are some fears that you have about this? And all of these things we welcome and anticipate and have ourselves is the other thing I want to say. I often think about the gendered nature of this task. Of who is expected to disclose, who might be more likely, what the risks of it are. We know what student evaluations look like if you're gendered as a woman, or if you are racialized, that it will contain some bias based on those identities. And so these are things that we're constantly thinking about, and we would love to hear what you're thinking about. What is coming up for you? What is exciting? What you do in the classroom that is meaningful for you in terms of inviting this kind of the recognition that there can be no critical thinking without a without a identification of feeling and of self in the process. And self involves not only the brilliant thoughts that we and our students have, but also the feelings and the emotions that exist in us.
So we could think about sharing a little bit of what we have, or even just reflecting on the experience of writing it down, or imagining sharing or showing up in this way.
Yes, Jill, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. I was like, I don't know how to share to start. I think what I loved about doing this is that it brings in a lot of the things that I'm thinking about. So I think when I'm sharing my identity with my students, I want to, like, here I am, I'm a white woman with a funny accent, right? And I'm sure, and I'm teaching biological psych. So how alien is that for our students? So I want to try and build a bridge. And so often what I share with students is I'm a first generation college student, right? And I'm the only person in my family to have a PhD. And my parents still don't really get what that means, you know, that they didn't really ever understand why I would do a PhD when I had a perfectly good job. So they left school at 14. And those are kind of things that I share with my students. But I am less good at sharing my biases. I think this was a really helpful exercise for me to think about being more vulnerable rather than just thinking about, well, look, I'm actually not perhaps exactly who you think I am based on my appearance and the way I sound, but I do have biases, right? And how do they show up in how I teach and how I think? And despite the fact that I try hard to educate myself and reflect on those biases, they will still be there. So I think that was really helpful as a reminder to me to talk about that in the classroom, and not just the building of bridges to say, I'm more like you than you think.
I love you psych folks so much for bringing all of this up because my entire intro to social course is built on this. Like, they do an essay over the course of the entire semester where they're identifying their various identities and what they mean and the power dynamic. And so I have to start by modeling this way. But I realized in what you presented that I'm always thinking about what they feel and what they need, right? So for example, if I'm sharing my race and ethnicity, right, I will be like, you know, obviously from a political perspective, I am a white person, but there is nuance to whiteness, right? I am Jewish and I am Italian American first gen on that side. And so there's complications. Or I'll think about how, even though I have all this privilege that comes from my education, from my race, from my access, that I'm still a woman in patriarchy, right? And I still have invisible disabilities and mental health challenges. And I'm always thinking about it from their perspective. Like, it might be hard sitting there as a queer Black woman to figure out what your privileges are, but are you able-bodied? Are you cisgender? Are you heterosexual? And I'm always thinking about building my bio for their benefit. But now that you made me think, damn it, like to Pam's point about my question at the beginning, I think this brings up a lot of shame and anxiety for me. Like, I think, right? Like, I think admitting the white privilege, the class privilege, you know, at this point in my life, and trying to even compare my intersectional identity to the kind of privileges and oppressions they have actually makes me deeply uncomfortable. And that's why I end up telling like these canned jokes that Pam was able to immediately see, is me being like, but like me, I'm different than the other white ladies. Like, you know, that was mocking myself, but like, I think Jill and I share that, right? We want to show that our class background or our family background makes us relatable, you know?
Marissa, that's super cool that you were able to even reflect on that right now. I love it. And it was making me think too, because I don't know that I've ever thought about this like this until we're talking right now. I go to the room and I'm so needing everyone to feel safe and okay there that I have been very like, I've had students reflect to me multiple times. They say things like, do you ever get mad? Are you ever sad? A student came up one time and said, how can I be happy like you all the time? And I'm like, that's hilarious, because guess what? Pam's not happy all the time. But there's this thing that I'm doing that I guess is okay, but there is something a smidge inauthentic about that too. And maybe it'd be useful for me to talk about what about my job is deeply frustrating sometimes, or makes me feel unsure or sad or not so good. Even with regards to the class. You saying that actually made me think about that right now too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not teaching, right? So, but I've taught for 27 years off and on, or longer. And so I was thinking, I was putting this together in the format that was modeled. And yes, I mean, I'm pretty, at this point, I'm pretty comfortable disclosing that I am white, middle class from a suburban, predominantly white suburb, right? Like, this is part of my story. And, but then I was like, Jesus, right? Like, I'm not first generation. I was doing all these things. And it's that relatability thing of like, no, I had all these privileges. And I think, so then I was going to the mental health side. And then I'm like, I'm just a little less comfortable over here. Not without its own struggles, right? Like, I've got stuff that I think probably would be really great to disclose to people. And I have a family history with stuff that's probably great to disclose to people. And I started doing that, but then I thought, am I pulling out the alcoholic parents thing almost as like, look, I've suffered too, right? Because I don't think of it that way. I think of it as, that's why I don't disclose. And that's why I'm hyper responsible, right? And so, like, you know, there's different reasons of why I am the way I am, but it's like, what do they need to feel safe? And what's being vulnerable for the sake of vulnerability porn or whatever it is, right? Like, I don't want to just, I do need to disclose, I presume, in order for people to feel like they know who I am. But I also, I'm just wary of like, for whose benefit, right? Do I feel better saying that I had alcoholic parents? Do they care?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they do, maybe they can relate, right? But
This really resonates. This really resonates. I have been doing, at the start of every semester, so starting tomorrow, I'm going to evoke Bianca Williams in the classroom, and
Yeah.
I'm going to share who I am. But that script has changed a lot over the years. And I started 2 years into it. I noticed I have a stutter.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more severe than other times. And I would never mention it. I would never mention that. My mom had schizophrenia, and that is actually a really big reason why I entered the discipline. And I would be in psychological disorders and distress, and I would never mention it. And I would reflect, like, what is this? Like, it was impossible for me to even imagine saying it. So 1 year, it was really recently, and actually it was only this year when in psychological disorders and distress, I shared, what brought me into the classroom, like why psychology, like the big why. And it really had to do with it had to do with structural violence and how it shows up in the body. And I shared it. And I was like really hesitant because I felt really scared when I did it. Um, and it was beautiful to see what happened in the classroom when I did that, when I did what scared me. And it really did, both like talking about a stutter, and I still something, most of the time I don't mention it. Most of the time I don't, because I hope that somehow it will break a spell. Like I'm afraid if I say it, I will do it. So it really is, it's something
Yeah.
silly like that. But there was
Right.
something really like, this scared me, so it must be important. Like
Right.
something like that happened.
Right.
But it changes. I feel like every year it's different, and it is very much responsive to who I am in the moment and who's in the room. Like we have to feel our community. And so I totally, that really resonated what you said, Allison, about, what is necessary and why? What is the outcome of this? Will this allow more of my students to feel like they are safe in this community? And so far, those moments when I was scared, but I said it did transform what we were able to become together. But I think it's living. I don't know what I'll say tomorrow. I'm kind of curious, and I'll reflect on why.
I think in terms of those of us who have copious amounts of privilege, one of the ways that it's, I think, important political, pedagogical, to have this conversation is that even if you have multiple dimensions of privilege, you can still demonstrate different levels of awareness of it, right?
Absolutely.
So even though, Allison comes in front of a room of students, they see the suit, they see the blonde hair, they see the title, right? But admitting the phenomenal privilege that came with those accidents of birth matters. They feel safer. And I think it's worth mentioning that here too.
Absolutely. And that part I am comfortable sort of saying, because I do think, again, it sort of decenters any sense of unspoken norms, right? Yeah.
I think a cool thing of what's happened here for me now is it even for the first time occurred to me, because I'm personally not even like a natural sharer. I don't have like any mystery about me, but I don't do that. I could talk to someone for a full hour and not say one thing about me. It's like a natural thing about me.
Right.
But it's an irrational thought that happened as I was listening. I thought, would I be afraid to say certain things about my mom or dad? And I irrationally thought, well, if somebody comments on my mom or dad, I'll get mad. Now, why would they comment on my mom or dad in the classroom? But it's interesting that was somehow like that vulnerability was, yes. Why was that even in there?
And they wanted to know what makes you angry.
I'll show it, right? And it's so interesting that somehow that was woven in like an irrational way, probably in my body.
Yeah.
That would have had me rationally go why I wouldn't need to kind of be myself in a way. The stuff is so complicated.
It is.
But this was like such an interesting conversation. I thought we said, oh, there's only going to be a couple people. That's either like a really cool thing or, and I'm so glad that we were able to be here right now and have this kind of like more thorough conversation with each other. This was really helpful for me. I hope this was helpful for all of you, as I'm going to be thinking about a lot of what you all said.
This is the best FCD session I've ever been to since they started. Like, I feel different about tomorrow because of this hour with you. Thank you
No,
so
actually,
much.
thank you for the preparation and the thoughts. It was really stimulating and just exciting. I really do appreciate what you're doing, and I think you're making the college better. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate everyone's time today and your engagement and your thoughts. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here. We'll see you around. Thank you so much.
See you downstairs or
Thank you.
across the college soon.
And authenticity, we're so lucky we get to be part of your communities. Thank
We're
you.
so lucky to have you all.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.